Welcome to Front Office Pros. I'm Steve. This is Joe. Today, we're going to be talking about three players that we are hitting the panic button on coming into the playoff stretch. So, Joe, let's talk about the first player. And our first player that we are panicking on, this is a player that we identified as a league loser in one of our videos last week, is quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. He had not a very good day Sunday night. Against the Chargers, he was 10 for 28, passing 145 yards and a touchdown, no picks, but 3 attempts for 28 yards. Not a good day for Tua against the Chargers, who didn't really have much of a defense.
Yeah, I was willing to give Tua a pass after the poor game against the 49ers. That's a tough defense. Just saw what they were able to do to Brady this past weekend. But Tua playing Sunday night against the Chargers, I really thought that was going to be a bounce back game for Tua and this Dolphins offense. But then kind of seeing him struggle the similarly he did with the 49ers. I mean, still the ball's missing kind of high on certain routes. It's definitely concerning. And, the matchups, as we mentioned down the playoff stretch, it doesn't get much, it doesn't get easier from here. It only gets more difficult. So, yeah, definitely not feeling too encouraged about Tua here.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised in the news. I saw that the Dolphins were heating up the sideline, and it was 55 degrees. They're coming to Buffalo on Saturday night on a short week. It's going to be, I think, snowing, so it's going to be rough conditions. Then they got Green Bay at home, but then they go at New England, and you never know with that Bill Belichick defense. So, to me, I'm pretty panicked about. Now, I'm not panicked about Tua in next. I think Tua could be a QB1 moving forward. I really like what I've seen from him. I just am concerned about how the rest of the season is going to go because of these matchups, but I really do like his outlook for 2023 and beyond. It's more so just this playoff stretch. But, Joe, how panicked are you, would you say, if you were to give a number, how panicked would you say you are with Tua right now?
If I had to put a number to it, I'm probably somewhere around probably like a 7 on him.
For the
Panic
playoff
level.
stretch or for the rest of his like and beyond?
Yeah, mainly for the playoff stretch, but um, the one thing that's kind of concerning though for the future is, I heard the broadcast, during the game and mentioning that the Chargers are kind of just sitting back and not letting those deep plays happen and the big plays happen for the Dolphins. And they alluded to it's not the first time a defense has done that to them, but at the same time, they didn't really seem to have any ideas or ways to counteract that and be productive. So, they got to make some adjustments in the offseason, figure out how to kind of counteract that and not let these defenses just take their explosive offense away.
Well, it is interesting you say that because Mike McDaniel is a new head coach with a new offensive style. Usually after you've got a year of tape to review, could you see a setback next year if they don't make those adjustments you're talking about? I just think that offense is too dynamic with all the speed, and I'm sure they'll probably add more speed in the offseason. So to me, I'm not worried about him long term. I agree with you. I think 7 or 8. We kind of identified him as a league loser. I think there's going to be some better options for you down the playoff stretch, but he's definitely a guy that I'm panicked at. So we'll have to see what happens with him here in the next few weeks. But going on to our next panic play. Now, this is a guy I know you agree with me, Joe. We're panicked on him for the playoff stretch, and we're talking about possibly beyond. That's quarterback Deshaun Watson. Some could have given him the benefit of the doubt with his Browns debut against the Texans. It's being a different game. A lot of emotions could come into play. But going up against the Bengals, he was 26 for 42, 276 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And then he had 6 attempts for 33 yards. But, Joe, he still is not looking good right now.
Yeah, no, he's really not. And, like you mentioned, I expected him to look rusty against the Texans. Thought he could potentially look a little better, even though, Bengals defense has been pretty tough. Thought he could look a little better, but same thing, just not looking that impressive. And I think the main problem is that the number you said, the passing attempts. I mean, the Browns have completely lost their identity of running the ball. I mean, Chubb had a disappointing day, but they've completely, since Watson's been there, just gotten away from their identity, which is the run and then the play action game. And I think that actually could benefit Watson. And it's only hurting him that they're not involving the run game enough, and he's just dropping back all these times.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I just before you mentioned it, wasn't really thinking about it, but it's true. Their identity has been, ground and pound with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. But now that Watson's been the quarterback, that identity has seemed to change. I wonder if it's going to take an off season and for him to really be fully, he's been, I guess, reviewing the playbook. I don't know. Maybe you can't give him a pass. I'm concerned about him moving forward for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, the Browns offense was, moving the ball and looking pretty good with Brissett. And then, now that Watson's been there, they're struggling to score points, and just really haven't been in the games. And that first game that they played the Bengals at home on Halloween night, they just completely dominated the Bengals and ran the ball. Chubb had a phenomenal game.
That's right.
So just wonder why that changed and why they allowed Watson to throw that many times. Just mind boggles me.
So they've got Baltimore at home, New Orleans at home, and then at Washington. So how panicked are you for the rest of the season? And then is that number any different heading into next year and beyond?
Yeah, for the rest of the season, those are some pretty tough matchups. I'm pretty panicked on them the rest of the season. Um, maybe even, between an 8 and a 9, they're pretty panicked. I don't really like them. I think there's some probably better potential guys you could roll with for the playoff stretch. But then, for the next year, you just got to hope with a, full off season with the team and not having all these allegations looming that he comes and returns to more so what we saw with Houston.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you. I'm pretty panicked on him as well. I'd say 8's probably a good number. I'm maybe not there at the 9 or 10. I kind of want to see a few more games. But if he doesn't show a strong finish, I think it's definitely going to be concerning moving forward, especially if you've invested a lot into him into Dynasty, because his value is absolutely plummeted. So let's talk about our last player that we're panicking on. And this is a guy that, a lot of people were really excited about, especially after James Robinson got traded, myself included, because he was going to get the lion's share of the carries. But talk about him falling off a cliff as running back Travis Etienne. Against the Titans, he had 17 attempts for 32 yards, no touchdowns. He had no targets in the game, which I thought was quite shocking. No receptions, Joe, no fumbles, but just not really involved in the game plan.
Yeah, it's concerning. Really, the last 4 weeks, he really hasn't been impressive for you in fantasy. And, as you mentioned, the concerning thing is, it's one thing that Tennessee's D line is pretty impressive and pretty good against the run. So, like, his run line's not surprising, against the Titans. Secondary is where you beat him. But the fact that he had no targets, this is a guy who'd been an all-purpose back, utilized in both aspects of the game when he first took over, and when they really started to turn to him instead of James Robinson. So, that's really kind of what puts him in this panic meter, is just how his utilization has seemed to kind of go down here and really take a hit.
That's where I feel like you got to be careful as far as overreactions go, because after I saw what he did those few weeks where it was like he's balling out, I was like, man, it's, do we have to talk about him in the conversation as the number one dynasty running back? And then all of a sudden it's just like the wheels fell off, and it just doesn't make any sense. I think he got injured, if I'm not mistaken, in Baltimore. So, you could throw that game out. He only had 2 carries for 3 yards. But like you said, that most recent game, we just talked about that. Detroit had 13 carries for 54 yards. No rushing touchdowns there either. Only 3 targets in that game. And then against the Chiefs, he had 11 carries for 45 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 targets. So he's just not really getting targeted that much in this offense. And you'd think with the rapport that he has with Trevor Lawrence in their days of playing at Clemson, and with really no competition at the running back. They're not really using Snoop Connor or JaMychal Hasty. It's just weird. And the ups and the bad, even more worse thing about this is Lawrence has actually been very successful recently, and he's doing very well throwing it to the receivers. You've seen Zay Jones do really well. Evan Ingram had a career day. So, they don't really need to change their game plan because they're playing really well right now.
Yeah, I think they still got to, Peterson's going to have to find ways to manufacture touches for the guy. He's he was too explosive early on for him not to, keep involved. I just wonder if the concerns about Etienne's size and durability and can handle a strong workload, if they're also concerned about that and trying to, lighten his load down the stretch here.
I mean, 5'10", 215, I don't think is, it's tiny by any means.
Yeah, no, I just that's what other people have said. They don't, the one knack on Etienne was they didn't believe at his size.
That's true. I remember
that he could handle the type of workload he was getting early on in the year, even though he was very impressive.
And he's had a lot of mileage in Clemson. I think that's part of the reason why he maybe slid as much as he did, or when people had thought about whether he'd get drafted in the first round or not. But that you kind of talk about that. That's why that happened. But for the rest of the playoffs here, Joe, he's got Dallas this week at Dallas. Dallas is coming to Jacksonville. He's got at New York Jets and then at Houston. I mean, Houston's the juicy matchup, but these other two, I feel like you've got to fade them. I mean, what's your panic meter on Travis Etienne for the playoffs, and is it any different for beyond here?
Yeah, it definitely is different. I'm definitely, like you said, I'm fading him these next 2 weeks with the tough matchups. But if you happen to make it to your championship, he should, as long as they use him, Houston's the worst run defense. So, I mean, he should absolutely ball out in that game. But, for the playoff stretch, I'd probably go 7 with Etienne. But, I think I'm definitely not as panicked for the start of next year. And for next season, I think the main thing to just watch for next year is his health and see if he can continue to handle all the touches he potentially is going to get.
And that's a possibility. He might not be fully healthy either when he exited the Ravens game. I remember they were talking a little bit about his foot and stuff, and it didn't seem like Peterson was very he kind of was like word salad a little bit. He wasn't really clear about what was his diagnosis and what was going on there for him. I agree with you. I'd say panic level is around a 7 for this playoff stretch. You would think he's going to ball out in Houston, and I would play him. I have him, so I'll play him. And I honestly, based on my options, I'm probably going to play him in your league anyways. But when it comes down to it, I don't really know what to expect from him. And he could be very disappointing these next few weeks. I wouldn't be surprised. And with Houston, if he doesn't perform, then to me, that's really concerning. But either way, I'm not concerned about him heading into next year. Now, what I would be on the lookout for next year is, do they bring a complimentary running back in? Because Snoop Conner and JaMychal Hasty are not complimentary running backs. But if they bring in maybe a more bigger body guy like they had in James Robinson, and they sign somebody in free agency, or they draft somebody early on, with Peterson and how he's involved multiple running backs before, that is what concerns me. And just that allure of that possibly happening probably puts him down in my dynasty rankings. I have nothing to verify that, but just that looming in the background makes me sort of concerned. Do you think I'm nuts there, or do you think there's a valid point there?
No, I think it's definitely a valid point. I mean, Etienne also wasn't drafted by Peterson. I mean, this is a guy that was last year's regime, so the fact that he was even, utilizing him this much and put him in the game plan, I mean, shows something. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure they will draft somebody because, like you said, I mean, they can't rely on Hasty and Snoop Conner. I mean, those guys really haven't shown much. So they probably will make a move, whether it's in the draft or free agency for sure.
So definitely something you'll need to keep tabs on as dynasty owners for Travis Etienne. But that is our 3 players that we are panicking on heading into the playoffs. And we're a new channel. We create several videos on a weekly basis. So we would appreciate your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell. And if you have any comments below, are there players that you're panicked about heading into the playoffs? And are there some players that you're wondering whether maybe I should reconsider their spot on my roster heading into 2023. We're going to be talking a lot about Dynasty coming up. I know Joe and I are super excited about it. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time.